Hey, it's Jim Dodson, the Florida Bike Guy. So, welcome to our live stream. Today, I want to talk about the topic of when you should consider settling an auto or a bike case on your own. We get this question pretty regularly. I'm going to give you four topics I'd like to cover today. The first would be an area, number one, where you definitely could consider settling an auto or a bike crash on your own. I'll talk about the areas, those types of cases where, in my view, you definitely need an attorney. I'll talk about there's a pitfall for the unwary in terms of dealing with health insurance or Medicare. And then finally, I want to talk about number four, some of the advantages you have when you talk to an attorney or when you're represented by a lawyer. So what are the cases that you should definitely consider maybe settling a case on your own? And in my view, they are the type of case where, you're only using the PIP or the medical insurance that comes on the auto. So remember, if you're on your bicycle and you're injured by a car, or you're in a car crash as a driver or a passenger, there is mandatory medical insurance in Florida under what we call the personal injury protection of your own auto policy, and that's up to $10,000. Okay. So that is not a benefit that you have to repay out of the settlement of your case. It's available to you regardless of fault, and it covers up to the first $10,000 of your medical treatment. Okay. So if you have a case where only the PIP is involved, in other words, your medical treatment doesn't go over $10,000, there is no surgery, there's no nerve injury, there's no significant permanent scarring, and it's a situation where you feel like you pretty well recovered in the first few weeks. Definitely a case that I would talk to you about settling on your own. And I think sometimes people have a question about it, and I'd be happy to talk to you about the circumstances of a case and tell you. I'm the first to tell you if you can do just as well on your own, and I'll even tell you what to do in order to make that happen. Okay. Now, number two is, what are those cases where, in my view and in my experience, having done this for 30 years, when you should definitely consider and hire an attorney? And first would be if you have an injury that requires surgery, or one that involves a nerve injury. We have significant nerve injuries that can cause limitations and permanent paralysis in people. And finally, where you have an injury that might involve permanent and significant scarring. Okay. The other would be if Medicare is involved in paying for your health care or your health insurance because of some issues related to reimbursing them. Also, a case in which you have suffered an injury that's going to lead to permanent limitations in your activities, your quality of life going forward, or one in which the doctors are already telling you you're going to have future medical treatment, the need for future medical treatment. In any of these situations, in my view, you definitely need to consult with an attorney. And in most of these situations, you definitely need to have an attorney on your side doing what lawyers do in order for you to receive the compensation that you should be entitled to. Now, there is a real trap for people who are unaware of something we call health insurance or Medicare subrogation. That means that when you have health insurance, particularly if you have Medicare, and the Medicare or health insurance pays the medical expenses that you incur because of a bike crash or you're involved in an auto accident, they are entitled to subrogate or stand in your shoes and collect what they paid out on your behalf out of your settlement. A lot of people don't understand why. I've paid for the health insurance, I paid for Medicare, it's a benefit I have, but I understand your reaction when I tell you that, but I can just tell you, having done this all these years, that's not a winning argument. They are entitled to be reimbursed. Florida law is very clear. National federal law is very clear. Medicare is entitled to be reimbursed. And there are penalties associated with not handling that correctly. Medicare is particularly treacherous to deal with. I've had people that have called us and explained, well, I settled my case. I said, did you have Medicare? Yes. Did you pay them back? Well, I didn't know I had to pay Medicare back. That's a big problem, because if you don't handle the Medicare lien correctly, they will actually have the right to set off your future benefits for what they did not receive from you from the settlement. So in that situation, you definitely need the advice of an attorney. Um, so I think a lot of people are talking about like what are the advantages of working with a lawyer. I think the biggest advantage that I recognize, having talked to so many people and met with them in their home, met with them in a hospital, even meeting with them in our office, is this relief that people have when you've been injured, your world has been turned upside down, you don't know which way to turn. It's that simple relief of turning all of these issues over to an experienced lawyer who's definitely on your side. I always tell people you have a life and you have a case. We'll take care of your case. I want you to focus on your life. That's a real comfort to people, but I don't have to worry about the next phone call and what am I going to say and what's the explanation? Am I going to say something that could hurt my case? Um, there's also the issue of billing. I've already alluded to the Medicare trap and the reimbursement subrogation trap. The billing issue takes quite a bit of time. One of the biggest responsibilities that my assistant Judy has, and she's worked for me for 30 years with me as a team for 30 years, is pulling together all the billing issues. Are the doctors billing? Have they been paid? How much is the medical lien? Has it been submitted? Have we received a notification from a health insurance company or from Medicare about what the lien is? Have they added things to the lien that are unrelated to the injury that we're representing the client for? That happens a lot. Mistaken additions to the lien that we can get reduced. So not being responsible for those billing issues is a huge relief to the vast majority of people who we encounter in our practice. Knowing when and how to conduct an investigation after a crash has occurred. We don't have to have an investigator in every case, but in a lot of cases we do. And they do things from scene investigation to tracking down witnesses. There's a lot of things we do. We have engineers that get involved. In bike cases, engineer gets involved frequently to download the data on the Garmin, the GPS locations, where was everybody at the time. There's a lot of things that investigators do to facilitate the investigation of a bike crash. But beyond that, we also use life care planners. In many cases, someone's ability to earn money in the future has been affected, or the need for future medical care in the future has been a part of the case. And we may need the assistance of a life care planner to kind of project out what those costs are. And when you start calculating taking one medication that costs you $150 a month over a 20-year life expectancy. That becomes a huge number that many times people fail to recognize when they even consider the value of their own case. So we have doctor issues, who's the brain injury doctor to see, who's the concussion doctor you need to see, who's the neuropsychologist you need to see. There's just a lot of things that we can do to enhance a person's ability to diagnose the case and get a recovery. The other thing that a claims adjuster understands, and we deal with a lawyer, that the lawyer can file suit if the case isn't settled within what is viewed to be a fair and reasonable amount. If you're handling a case on your own, you don't have that implicit threat. We don't, in our practice, it's not our practice to simply file suit in every case. We file suit when it's necessary in order to protect our client and get the full value. We are very successful in, quite frankly, working a case up and to not necessarily having to file suit, not necessarily having to increase the attorney's fees, but allow our client to get a larger net recovery because we're not in litigation and don't have a larger attorney's fee to deal with. But we have that implicit threat if the insurance company doesn't handle the case properly, that's exactly what we can do. And I would add another thing. When you're injured in a crash, whether in a passenger in a car or riding your bike, you have an injury. Unless you've been in the claims business in the past, it's just impossible to have any concept of what an injury might be worth. Many times, a client's value or view of the value of an injury has nothing to do with the actual case value. Many times clients kind of get it confused with what they need in their life. I need a roof for the house. I need my car. I need to buy a new car. Well, that doesn't really have a direct bearing on the value of your case. So we have to deal with what's the value of the case. And I've done this 30 years. My assistant, Judy, has worked with me for 30 years. And in our practice, we have a claims adjuster, Mark, who works in our office. He's retired as a major case handler from a major insurance company. He's worked with us for several years. Mark brings all of that experience of 30 years in evaluating how defendants look at the case, what they need in order to get the case value established, and then placing the proper value on a client's injury. So trying to do that on your own is just impossible. You have no frame of reference. A lot of people are under the mistaken belief that, hey, there's just a formula. You look at the medical bills, and it's 3 times the medical records. Well, clearly there's a relationship. A case that has $100,000 in medical bills is worth more than a case that has 10, but it's not simply a matter of it's 2 or 3 times what the medical bills are. It's much more nuanced than that. I think it's interesting. Some people just can't get past the fact that, well, a lawyer is going to take maybe a third of your settlement. And I understand that feeling sometimes. I'll give you an example. Somebody calls here and said in conversation, I got my case settled for $30,000. In their view, they've saved $10,000 if the lawyer charged a third. But in conversation, listening to what the injury is and what the medical records were and how it was worked up, the case is worth $90,000 in my view. Client got it settled for 30. They saved 10, but they lost 60 because they didn't understand the implications of their injury and the full value of what's involved. The other thing to consider, like when you consider the attorney's fees, we are going to save money in virtually every case on getting the medical lien. So we've talked about Medicare has a right of reimbursement. Health insurance has a right of reimbursement. Typically, like in the Medicare situation, they are going to give us a credit for basically collecting that lien for them. So to use an example, if the Medicare bill is $45,000 and they send us a notice that they're looking for reimbursement of $45,000 from the settlement, when the settlement is done, they're going to reduce that lien, their subrogation right, by a third, if that's the percentage of the fee. Recognize we've collected that for them. It's a much more complicated formula but in essence, it works out that $45,000 lien would turn into a $30,000 actual payment. And you're going to pay a percentage to the lawyer, but when you calculate how much savings you're actually receiving, the lawyer typically is going to get a higher settlement, going to pay a fee on that, but the lawyer is then going to knock off, if the Medicare lien could say $15,000 on the Medicare lien, well, that offsets a great deal of what the attorney's fees are in terms of the net effect for the client in their pocket. But again, I think at the end of the day, most clients are just so relieved and comforted knowing that someone that they know and trust is making decisions to help them, giving them the alternatives to make intelligent, reasonable choices for their lives, giving them a sense of control in a situation where they didn't feel they had any control. And they're relieved to move through this process knowing they've got someone in your corner who cares about them and is looking out for their best interest. So, those are my thoughts on when you should consider hiring a lawyer and when maybe you should consider representing yourself in a minor case. I want to remind you that we represent cyclists across Florida, whether you've been involved in a car crash or a bike crash. We welcome your referrals. you or the person you refer will be well taken care of by me and by this amazing team that we've assembled here at Jim Dodson Law. So if we can help you, just call, let us know. We have an offer for you today. You know, I love this, our phone case. This is a waterproof phone case. Comes with some branded information inside. It's shamelessly logoed. And I always tell people that it comes with a lifetime guarantee. If it breaks or cracks or fails in any way, we'll give you another one. So this is the offer. Get it. You can go to the bit.ly link and get a copy, get one of these sent to you. If I can help you in any way, let us know. I'm Jim Dodson, the Florida Bike Guy. We'll see you on the road. Be safe.